good people don't smoke marijuana.
I've known Larry for a long time.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana. Radio show. The medical marijuana for you and me. Ah, yeah, the medical marijuana. Whoa, 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 yeah, the medical. It's the medical marijuana show. You will know.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending upon where you are. Welcome to another edition of Medical Marijuana Radio. This one is for Saturday, the 22nd of June, 2019. I'm your host, Larry Love, and we're here every week to bring you a digital history for the last 10 years of what it's been like fighting for the right to use medical cannabis and adult responsible use of recreational cannabis. And, of course, the information comes from all over the globe. And we're ramping up here in the United States, and things are happening. Today's guest will be Gary Stein. He's going to tell us what the changes have been in Florida and how the proliferation of the hemp bill for Florida, the 2018 Farm Bill, and how they're trying to figure out the rules and regulations to get that started in 2020. But first, I've got a bunch of news for you, so we're going to get right at it. The most important thing this week, of course, is that Congressman Earl Blumenauer from Oregon had a bill that was going to protect veterans and so forth, and he had to withdraw that bill yesterday. I'm going to play you first his comments, Congressman Blumenauer's comments about withdrawing the bill, and that's because the Veterans Administration put out an opposition comment that made him withdraw this. And after I play you Representative's comments, I'm going to have Michael Krawitz on, who's been fighting for veterans, is one of the top guys. He's going to comment on what happened. So first, here is Earl Blumenauer yesterday.
Very important week in the evolution of the federal policy to end the failed policy of prohibition on cannabis. Yesterday, the House overwhelmingly approved my amendment that would prohibit the Department of Justice from interfering with any state legal cannabis activities. We'd also approved an amendment that granted the same protections to the tribes. This is remarkable progress that we have seen, but it is just an effort by Congress to catch up to where the rest of the American public is. For the last 23 years, American voters have changed the policies that are outmoded and dangerous. Most recently, we have seen a wave of activity dealing not just with medical marijuana, but with dealing with adult use. The public, by a 2/3 margin, supports this. And when we talk about medical marijuana, it's like the 4th of July. 90% of the American public believe that we ought to have access to medical marijuana. I have been working in this Congress to extend the same opportunities to our veterans, who, if anything, need medical marijuana more than any other category of our citizens. We lost 7,000 people to the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, but we've lost 100,000 of those veterans to suicides and opioid overdoses. The VA, I'm afraid, has not been as helpful as it should be. They prescribe opioids at a rate for our veterans at a rate 50% higher than others. Our veterans are twice as likely to die from overdose. I am deeply concerned about that. That's why I've repeatedly advanced this amendment. 2 sessions ago, it passed the House, it passed the Senate, it was in the final version of the bill, only to be stripped out by the Republican leadership. An illustration of how far we have evolved, the House leadership that stripped this provision out was headed by Speaker Boehner, who is now a spokesperson for the cannabis industry, having described that he's evolved on this issue and thinks it's a good idea. We haven't evolved in this Congress in providing protections for the VA. Even though this amendment has passed repeatedly, all of a sudden the VA has decided, well, they would be putting their doctors at risk. Never came up before. If we'd known about it, we could work it around. And I think we can and should work to fix this. It is outrageous that veterans, and if you talk to people like the Veterans Cannabis Coalition, or talk to veterans in your own district, who will tell you that their lives have been transformed by access to medical cannabis, and they don't want highly addictive, dangerous opioids. We need to do right by them. I am going to reluctantly withdraw this amendment that has passed repeatedly on the floor of the House and is so badly needed. And I hope that we'll be able to work together to fix this little quirk, to make sure that VA doctors can do what doctors everywhere do in states where medical cannabis is legal, and be able to work with their patients. The VA ought to give their patients, our veterans, the same consideration to be able to have them be able to have these conversations with the doctors that know them best. But as I say, Madam Chair, I will reluctantly withdraw it, confident that we can work together to solve it and ultimately give our veterans the access that they deserve and need. I withdraw the amendment.
Okay, so I had a chance to speak with Michael Krawitz for a few minutes to get his comments on Senator Blumenauer withdrawing and the comments by the Veterans Administration. I had to do this by phone, so the quality is not as good as this, but here's Michael in response to the pulling of this bill, and that Michael has been working on for a long time himself.
Michael, yesterday, Earl Blumenauer from Oregon withdrew his bill in regards to cannabis and the VA and so forth. The VA made some comments that made him withdraw. So can you explain to me why he made that decision after the comments by the Veterans Administration?
Sure. I guess I should introduce myself. Many of your listeners probably know who I am. Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. I'm Michael Krawitz, Executive Director. We ran it since about 2008. And we've engaged the Veterans Affairs Department of the United States, and actually we're the ones to negotiate the first and only marijuana policy that the VA has ever come up with. The only marijuana policy in the entire federal system that is at all at odds with the status of marijuana Schedule 1. Because it does recognize that veterans use marijuana in these state programs, and it instructs doctors on how to deal with that and not to interrupt or interfere with that, which is really fascinating inside of the VA, inside of the federal system. So anyway, Earl Blumenauer, Congressman Blumenauer, withdrew his bill because of a fallout and really the first ever we saw active opposition from the Veterans Affairs Department. And the interesting thing about that for me is that they gave an argument, which has been the argument all along. It was what was enshrined in the policy that we got in 2010. And it's something that we well understand that Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access as to be the position of the VA, that they were given by the DEA. They were told by the DEA, this is I'm getting from the General Counsel of the VA. They were told by the DEA that should a doctor at the VA recommend cannabis, they could be arrested. I think that's bullshit, frankly. I don't think a doctor can be arrested for simply writing a recommendation. The whole idea of Cohen versus McCaffrey was to enjoin against the federal government for even trying. But they could do a lot of different things to doctors to harass them. They could take away their DEA license. They could do all kinds of things. So the Cohen decision wasn't just about the writing of the recommendation. I think the writing of a recommendation is quite legal. and it would be impossible to prosecute a veteran affair doctor for writing a recommendation, just like it would be impossible to prosecute a doctor outside the VA for writing a recommendation. What they could do is fire the doctor or censure them, or maybe even arrest them for not following VA policy, but they're not going to arrest them for writing a recommendation. But anyway, all that's nuanced. It's what we already knew about the VA's position. It's just the first time they've ever put their foot down. And with the VA in stark opposition to the bill, the Congressman's office just felt there wasn't enough support to get it passed. He has bigger fish to fry to put his time into.
So what's the next step then to get this bill back up and passed? I mean, the VA has to make some decisions, and what is your next move? Let's say.
Well, we started our next move last year, as you might imagine. We're playing along with the ball here, and we actually, believe it or not, went to Congressman Blumenauer's office and met with his staff, met with him personally, and told him that we wanted to do a change in narrative, that we felt that we had gotten as much out of the Veterans Equal Access Act amendment effort as we could, and that we wanted to shift gears and start focusing on the veteran, not on the doctor. We want to focus on the veteran's free speech rather than focusing on the doctor's lack of free speech. And that's what's been the focus of this all along, has been the doctor's lack of free speech. And
right.
This, just a side note, this probably is the only place that you'll find. I mean, I've been working in veteran stuff as a volunteer going all the way back into the 80s with Agent Orange issues. And I don't remember ever a time where the doctor was at odds with law just by representing the patient's needs. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
With the marijuana being Schedule 1, it creates a special circumstance where the doctor just following the state law and doing what they need to get the veteran access to cannabis under a state program, which would be a written recommendation.
Right.
So outside of what the doctor of the VA can do.
Right. So the assumption and supposedly the rule now is that veterans that live in states that have medical cannabis programs are allowed to use it, or is this being stopped now?
The policy has been the same since 2010. It was updated in 2011 and then again in 2016, 17. I forget exactly when it was in effect. But the policy has never really essentially changed. It says that veterans should not be punished or, in other words, sanctioned for their use of marijuana in the state program.
Right.
They don't really specify anymore whether it's a legalization program or a medical marijuana program. And in fact, that makes sense. It's consistent because the federal government doesn't see medical marijuana as valid by law.
Right.
Whatever Schedule 1 says by law, marijuana has a medical value.
Right.
So, but in keeping with the law, they're not recognizing medical as any kind of exception, which is fascinating because our first communications with the VA were about medical use, and it was very much hinged on a medical recommendation. Now that medical recommendation has been, in some cases met by proxy by a state determination of access under a state program and a legal card of exception to federal law. It's really fascinating. This is all unsettled stuff that I think is going to get washed away in a few years. But again, what we want to focus on is the veteran, and the veteran has free speech. So when you walk into a hospital, I'm not sure what this is going to lead to yet. We're actually trying to figure out right now what we're going to ask for as far as code. But what we're thinking about is not very good, because the VA is not playing along. The federal government's not playing along. It puts them in a very vulnerable position, and it puts us in a position where we are actually really compelled to sanction the VA for this. The VA is delivering medical care. They have to act ethically in the delivery of medical care, and they have to, based on the trust of the American people, to give veterans their best choices and all available options. There is absolutely no wiggle room here.
Right.
The VA has to figure this shit out, regardless of the federal DEA Schedule 1, and they're going to have to figure it out quickly, or they're going to be subject to sanction. That's what we're looking at right now.
Right. So what you just said, no matter what happens with Schedule 1. Now, Schedule 1 is the problem, right? So if it was taken off the Schedule 1, then Blumenauer's bill would pass in a second, and the protections and the vets would have what they want, right? So it's really about the Schedule 1, and that's the bottom line?
In this context, I'm not absolutely sure that's true. Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, I don't know would solve that problem.
Uh-huh. Okay, man.
The problem is, one of the doctors not being able to participate in a state law that's, in opposition to federal law. So you have to ask yourself, would Schedule 2, or even Schedule 3 for that matter, would that change the dynamic there? Would it make state programs fall into compliance with federal law? I don't think so. I think we've got a ways to go yet.
So that's Michael Krawitz, who has been fighting for veterans' rights and fighting for the drug, against the drug war for, 35 years or so. And those are Michael's comments in regards to the bill of being withdrawn yesterday, which was kind of sad. So back to work. What's more important than veterans? Keeping people out of jail for sure is more important than veterans, and not more important, but as important as veterans. So what's happening in New York this week is that they were unable to pass a adult use bill, but they did decriminalize in New York. And here is this report.
Well, the Senate voting to decriminalize marijuana earlier this evening as the legislature wound down this year's legislative session. Nick Reisman keeping us up to date on all this last-minute wheeling and dealing that's been going on all week long. And Nick, we end with not marijuana, at least recreationally legalized, but decriminalized.
That's right, Solomon. Lawmakers are moving to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana possession in New York and expunging records as well. It comes after a legalization bill failed to gain enough support in the state legislature. Now lawmakers are wrapping up the remainder of the legislative session.
After several days of delay, lawmakers on Thursday evening were set to approve a bill decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana and expunge the records of marijuana-related arrests. Senator Zellner Myrie says it's a good start.
I think it's important that we get as much restorative justice as possible. And for the folks who were suffering under the oppression of what we saw during stop and frisk and the drug war, if they can receive any relief in these coming days, I think it's something that we should pursue.
Well, that's certainly a great step forward to decriminalize before they legalize for adult use. It's too bad that I know the governor wanted to pass it, but I guess I wonder who doesn't want adult use cannabis. I wonder what party that could be. The party that's in power. That's what it is. All right, we're going to move around the states because that's what we do here. We tell you what's happening in medical and recreational use around the states. And here is a kind of an interesting report about how the Puget Sound has the highest cannabis use per capita worldwide. And the reason they know that? Yes, get this. They tested the wastewater. Yeah, ick.
What you flush down the toilet is helping researchers understand marijuana use in Washington state. That according to a new study released today from the University of Puget Sound. King 5's Callie Greenberg talked to the researcher about that.
It might be the last thing you'd think to find in a freezer.
So this is a cup of frozen wastewater. This is actually Christmas of 2016.
And to understand why the University of Puget Sound stores hundreds of these frozen samples.
Here are Seattle samples.
You have to ask chemist Dan Burgard about what he's been doing the past 5 years.
In 2014, stores opened selling recreational marijuana, and so we thought maybe we should use a non-traditional source to figure out if any of the consumption would change. And so we used wastewater, which is otherwise known as sewage.
In other words, what people in the Seattle-Tacoma area flush down their toilet.
We sometimes collect a liter. We sometimes collect
is what Dan and his students,
a couple of milliliters. It depends on what we're looking for and how concentrated it is,
have been studying.
There are always potty jokes in the lab. Maybe some I can't say on air, but.
What he can say is marijuana levels found in the samples show there was an uptick in use. And the data compared with state revenue suggests people very quickly started buying marijuana legally.
Trying to find those really low levels in a sample that's pretty complicated and pretty messy is a sophisticated technique. But in the end, it is measuring some stuff in sewage.
There's been a lack of research overall on marijuana use because it's illegal federally. People forget that.
Brian Smith is with Washington's Liquor and Cannabis Board. He says research like this can help people understand the growing industry.
This year in sales, we're going to exceed $1 billion.
Dan says the samples come from treatment facilities, making the findings anonymous. And when compared to cities around the world,
The Puget Sound area has the highest cannabis use, even over Amsterdam or in the Netherlands.
you find the proof flushed and frozen.
According to wastewater.
Callie Greenberg, King 5 News.
So, yeah, Washington State, Puget Sound. It's been legal there for a bunch of years, so that's how they test. Watch what you flush down the toilet, you guys and gals. All right, let's move on to Indiana, and this is how Indiana is keeping marijuana out of the state. Okay, this is a report from there.
When it comes to marijuana, Indiana is nearly what some call pot locked. All but one of our surrounding states have some form of statewide marijuana law in place.
So how will Governor Holcomb and Indiana State Police make sure Indiana stays weed-free? Our State House Bureau Chief David Williams is here to explain.
Well, just yesterday, Louisville City Council passed an ordinance that makes small amounts of weed for personal use one of the lowest priorities for police. Medical marijuana is legal in Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio. Recreational marijuana is legal in Michigan, and it's almost legal in Illinois, pending the governor's signature on a bill. And here in Indiana, CBD oil is legal, but marijuana is not. Indiana is the crossroads of America, and many of those roads lead right into states where some form of marijuana is legal. I asked Governor Eric Holcomb how our law enforcement will police the roads given our neighboring states' marijuana laws.
We got the best state police force in the country. I may be a little biased when I say that, but by every indicator that we measure, they are just that. And they'll continue to do their job, and they'll do it with distinction, regardless of policy changes that I think prematurely have been made in states surrounding us.
Indiana State Police Sergeant John Perrine tells me ISP is aware of what's happening in our surrounding states, but
we're not going to do anything different. We don't have any specific task force or plans. Our plan is simple, is we're going to continue to enforce laws the same way that we have done so in the past, and that is marijuana in the state of Indiana continues to be illegal.
We hit the streets near the State House to see what Hoosiers think about legalizing marijuana.
Definitely medically, I would be all for it. Recreationally, I'm still kind of skeptical.
From a tax standpoint, I think that Indianapolis would definitely benefit from it. But I do see some negative effects to it as well. I'm kind of in the middle.
I know younger kids and adults that have epilepsy, I know that it helps them. So medicinal use, yes, I do favor in that.
Bottom line, ISP says if you decide to buy marijuana outside of the state, don't bring it home. Otherwise, you'll face the consequences. Those consequences could be anything from a fine on up to a felony and time in jail. I'm David Williams, Wish TV, News 8.
Certainly don't want that. Again, no one should go to jail for using this plant. It's silly. Let's move over to Virginia, where the Attorney General calls for the state to legalize marijuana. Get that. That's very rare.
To a story that's stirring up a lot of debate, Virginia's top prosecutor says it's time to legalize marijuana. In an op-ed published in the Daily Press, Attorney General Mark Herring says the Commonwealth should start decriminalizing possession of small amounts of marijuana. Doing so would provide a path for full legalization. We talked with Virginia Normal, a group that's been advocating for marijuana law reform in the Commonwealth for years. They say the reform could have wide-ranging implications.
Marijuana possessions can trigger a host of collateral consequences, from losing housing to parental rights, student aid, driver's license, jobs, and even health care.
And an important note, the Republican-led General Assembly would still have to approve any decriminalization or legislation measures. In the past, they've shot those similar efforts down.
What's going to change? Well, maybe the Attorney General, the head lawmaker, saying, let's get rid of this. Let's clear up the jails and the courts. Good job, AG. Another good job, believe it or not, in Texas, Governor Abbott signed a bill expanding the Texas medical cannabis program this week. And wow, this is really amazing.
Along with many other bills, he signed an expansion of medical cannabis into law, but it doesn't go as far as some advocates hoped. Earlier tonight, KXAN's Alyssa Gord showed us how this push for expanded access played out and how those with serious medical conditions are responding.
Feel good? You feel good?
Mike Thompson knows what it's like to not feel good. He's a 4-time cancer survivor who took prescription opioids for the chronic pain from dozens of surgeries and a facial reconstruction.
After taking them for 5 straight years, I became addicted, and I never overused them. I never did anything illegal to get them. It was just the process of going to the doctor and not having anything else.
He's tried CBD oil out of state and has been advocating to expand access to medical cannabis in Texas. Under the 2015 Texas Compassionate Use Law, only those with intractable epilepsy can be prescribed CBD oil. But once House Bill 3703 goes into effect, those with terminal cancer, multiple sclerosis, autism, ALS, seizure disorders, and diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's can get low THC CBD oil as well.
And while I do think it's a misstep to remove the acute cancer provision and PTSD provision, there are still a number of patient publics that can now have access to this medication.
In a debate last fall, Governor Abbott said he's heard some strong arguments about why those with PTSD should get access, but
I'm still not convinced yet.
Nevertheless, Thompson thinks the new law the governor signed is a step in the right direction. He and other advocates say they'll be back for the 2021 legislative session to try and expand medical cannabis access to others with chronic illness.
Now, it's frustrating as not only a native Texan, but a 4-time cancer survivor that I still can't legally have access to it in Texas, but we're going to get there.
Alyssa Gord, KXAN News.
It's amazing.
This expansion of the Compassionate Use Act in Texas goes into effect in September.
Anyway, it's amazing that the governor just can't look at the science and look at other states. Here in New Mexico, we were the first state to have PTSD on our medical cannabis program. You know, look next door. You know, some of your vets are coming over here, and they're moving here. Come on, the science is there, Governor Abbott. You know, let's take care of these people. And cancer people? Taking cancer off the list? Step forward, right? A slow step. All right, we're going to talk to Gary Stein about Florida in just a couple of minutes after the break. I have a couple more stories. This one is from Florida. University of Florida has been chosen to lead the medical marijuana research in that state.
The University of Florida will begin taking part in a statewide research project on medical marijuana. Florida's Board of Governors chose UF to lead a group to study the health outcomes related to medical marijuana. The group will be made up of both public and private universities. UF will receive $1.5 million from the state every year. The research will focus on evaluating the safety and effectiveness of the drug, along with studying the effects of smoking medical marijuana versus other options.
Okay, and we are going to talk to Gary in just a few minutes, where now smoking is allowed in Florida as of, I guess, this week. But before, you know, on the lighter side of things, before we come back to Gary and talk about the 2018 Farm Bill and what's happening with getting rules and starting that program in Florida, on the lighter side of things, here is Willie Nelson on the Jimmy Fallon Show just this past week, I believe. And Willie says that cannabis saved his life.
I got to talk about this too, because you're on the cover of a magazine, Rolling Stone, and it's yeah, I love it. This is the weed issue, and this is. That is a great photo.
That's all you got to say.
That's all you got to say. It is a great photo, and there's a quote from you here. It says, "Marijuana saved my life."
Yeah.
Is that true?
I used to smoke 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day and drink whatever there was there to drink, you know, and I had pneumonia 4 or 5 times, my lung collapsed, I almost died, so I said, wait a minute, you know, I ain't getting that high off them Chesterfields.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Chesterfields. Wow. Jeez.
So I throwed out the cigarettes, rolled up 20 joints, stuck it in there, and I haven't smoked a cigarette since.
You haven't had a cigarette since? Wow, good for you. Now, do you, was that always the way it is now, or have you seen just the world kind of just totally change in the past couple of years with it being legalized?
Well, yeah, you know, people are kind of getting another look at it, and one of the main looks they're getting is there's money in there, you know. So.
Yeah, once that's involved.
Yeah.
Would you have your own, is it?
Willie Reserve.
Willie Reserve. Now, I was lucky enough to be gifted this.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It changed my life. Wow. And I really appreciate, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For that gift. Yeah, I was, yeah. Oh, I was floating for weeks. I got to say, no. I just to see that and to see the business that it's become, but it's the quality that goes into it.
Sure.
And you have assigned yourself CTO, is that correct?
Chief Tester.
Yeah, so Chief Testing Officer, yeah, so you get to see if it's real deal or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I haven't run across any that I didn't like.
That's unbelievable.
If there are any job openings for Chief Testing Operator officers, I'm applying. We'll be right back with Gary Stein right after these quick break.
It's all about the 420 MMJ Radio. The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana radio show.
Hi, this is Anthony Franchosi from the Honest Marijuana Company, and you're listening to Medical Marijuana Radio.
And we're back. And online from Florida, I've got Gary Stein. Gary is my warrior down in Florida who's an advocate and activist and has been fighting for the use of medical cannabis, recreational cannabis, and he's also working on the hemp rules with the 2018 Farm Bill. So, Gary, welcome once again to Medical Marijuana Radio. Tell us what happened this week with the medical program as far as being able to smoke cannabis now, because there was no smoking over the last few years.
That's correct. And we did have a lawsuit that actually had to be filed because of the fact that our legislature actually had banned smoking as a method of ingestion. And we actually had to have a lawsuit that tried to allow it. And we actually did win in the district court, and then there was an appeal set. Then we had to go to the District Court of Appeals, and it stayed there in District Court of Appeals for a while, and we asked the governor to release that appeal. He didn't. And then when we had a new governor, the governor had said, I'm going to release that appeal, but then he said, wait a minute, I'm going to ask for the legislature to go ahead and create a new law. And so they actually did. The very first law they came up with in this last legislative session was to allow it, because he said that he demanded it, and so they did it. But in true Florida fashion, they created one that was fairly restrictive. They actually at first were going to say that you actually had to have pre-rolls. That was the only way they were going to allow it, which was bizarre.
It's very bizarre.
Because, and I actually did testify and tell them that if we were going to have pre-rolls, it was going to increase the price, and we were going to have a much lower quality. Because if you think about it, if you sell strictly pre-rolls, it really does increase the price sometimes 3- and 4-fold.
Right. There's more work involved in rolling it and so forth. You have to buy the papers and all that stuff. And also, by the way, the medicine actually degrades, I think, if you're going to be having it around in a paper for a long period of time. So I think that was a very bad idea.
Oftentimes, in fact, most of the pre-rolls out there are made from a highly ground product, and sometimes they only use ground sugar leaves and shake. And so therefore, you've got lesser quality product.
That happens everywhere. I'm really on a thing to if they're selling pre-rolls, it should be bud, just like the same bud, especially in the medical industry, as there, if you were to buy a gram and roll it yourself. So it's really it's just abusive to medical patients to make them go through this. And I think that all sugar leaf and trim should be blown out into oil and made, for edibles and so forth. So the greed that some of the dispensaries and the licensed growers and dispensaries have is just running rampant in every state, not just in Florida. So what can you have now? Is there a restriction on the amount of THC, and what are the restrictions? You had mentioned to me that there are some restrictions.
Well, you can't possess any more than 2 ounces per month, and that is basically what we came down to. And I had actually testified again because we actually have 2 patients here in Florida who get their cannabis from the federal government. They're the last 2 patients that get it from the federal government, and they can actually get 4 ounces per month. And these are the ones that get it since the 1980s.
Right, that's Irv Rosenfeld, and what's the woman's name?
Elby Musica.
Elby, yes, that's right. So they've been getting this big tin of like 300 pieces of crap of joints for like 30 years.
Right, from the University of Mississippi.
Yes, absolutely, Ole Miss. So, all right.
Yeah.
So, what other restriction is there, and is it currently in place? Can people go in and buy an ounce or a half ounce of bud right now? And is there a restriction on THC or not at this point?
They actually tried to put a 10% THC cap.
Ridiculous.
In place, and that actually fell in the last couple days of session, because there was a bill it came from the House, and it was not picked up by the Senate, and they fought hard to get it, but it did not pass. They tried very, very hard, but they ultimately said the science behind it did not coalesce, and they actually did claim that all these states across the country had caps. But the states that they were talking about were these CBD only states.
Right. Because getting into the the CBD only and the hemp, the cap is 0.03%. In that range, but that's not really a THC product.
Well, interestingly enough, one of the things that they had mentioned as part of their reasoning was they talked about Amsterdam. And they claimed that Amsterdam also had a cap on the THC. But what is really interesting about Amsterdam is that the cap they're talking about in Amsterdam doesn't really work, because Amsterdam doesn't really have a medical program.
Right.
They don't even have a as you call it, a recreational program. I call it a responsible adult use program. What Amsterdam has is a toleration program. Amsterdam has these cannabis cafes where people actually have to buy, where the people who own the cafes actually buy it on the black market.
Right.
Because the restrictions are so great that nobody can actually sell it legally, and they just tolerate it.
Right. And they're
the
limited.
police actually look the wrong way.
They're also limited to how much they can have on hand at one time. I think it might be a half a pound or something that they have to buy at a time. A guy on a bicycle drives up and delivers it every few hours or however long it takes them to run out. But they also sell a lot of hashish. Now, there's no hashish that is going to be 10% or below in THC, so because that's a concentrate. So, Amsterdam certainly is not a model for anything but just people sitting around in a cafe being able to buy, a bud and smoke it. But as far as the medical programs are concerned, they tried to, they did cap here in New Mexico our concentrates to 70%. They wanted to dumb down our medicine, and of course that went away on the 14th of June, and now we fought for that, and now there's no cap on the concentrate amount of THC. Some of these programs are trying to be our mommies and daddies, and they're not really trying to be a medical program. and the greed that's happening in recreational is just running rampant. So, are there concentrates available in Florida? Can you get wax and capsules and so forth?
We have wax, we have butter, we have shatters, we have all sorts of concentrates, and that was another reason why having a 10% cap on THC in flour didn't make any sense if we have concentrates.
None at all.
So again, the reasoning behind THC caps in flour didn't make any sense if we had concentrates. And the other thing about concentrates here is that if you do possess concentrates and you're caught with it, and of course it's a felony over here.
Well, wait a minute. You're saying that the dispensaries don't sell concentrates?
Well, no, they do sell concentrates, but if you're caught with it and you don't have a medical card,
okay.
It's still a felony.
I got you. Okay. Well, decriminalization is something that's really going around. Are they working on decriminalizing in Florida, or is that not on the table yet?
No, we're still working on it. We still have municipalities that do have criminal citations.
Right. That's where it's starting. I mean, here in New Mexico, I believe July 1st, if I'm not mistaken, in a week or so, the whole state will be decriminalized. And there have been municipalities like Santa Fe and Albuquerque and some others that have decriminalized previous to the whole state. So, obviously that is something that we all want and have been fighting for, because nobody should be going to jail for this plant. So anything else on medical, or do you want to go into what you're doing as far as the 2018 Farm Bill?
Well, one more interesting thing about the medical plant. Now we do now have a whole flower, and we do have pre-rolls in regards to the whole flower. But when I did testify, I did mention the fact that this is not really about smoking. What it really is about is access to whole flower, because when we do have whole flower, we should be able to do anything we want with it, including processing at home to make edibles or whatever else we want to do with it. And when we do have pre-rolls, they did mention, and I love this part, that when they sell pre-rolls, they said that you cannot use hemp paper. You have to use rice paper. When I asked the person who wrote the bill is why it has to be rice paper and that the pre-rolls can be made from hemp paper, they said that is because hemp paper is illegal.
That is totally ridiculous. Who is you have the name of the person that's responsible for that stupid statement?
Representative Ray Rodriguez.
Wow, that's really crazy. Now, personally, I use rice papers. I use Modiano from Spain and some Elements. I do like rice papers, but what the hemp papers? There's no CBD in it, and there's no THC in it. So I don't know. That's just crazy.
Exactly right.
So let's move over to the Farm Bill. How is Florida putting the rules into effect? Are they looking at other states? There's a woman who's like one of the experts up in Colorado. Her name is Veronica Carpio. She has been active in passing and writing bills that will classify CBD as a food product, and that it can be in foods, and that's what's protecting some of the states. Like New Mexico also passed that, and I think California is working on it. So you guys really should contact her and get some of the verbiage from her when you're making these hemp rules, because she actually has hemp conferences every other week and so forth. So what are you guys looking at other states as an example, and what states would they be?
Yeah, we are looking basically with CBD as a food and the rest of it as what they call biomass. And that means that the stalk with the fibers and all that bit is, and the rest of the spent plant after the CBD has been removed out is considered used as biomass for fibers for cloth and things of that sort. And so the Department of Agriculture, with the bill, which we're still waiting for the governor to sign, which was written this last session, is working on the rules right now. They have as of August 1st to go ahead and start writing the rules and regulations. Now, what that has happened as far as the sale of CBD products in the state of Florida is that it was a gray area. in regards to whether the sale of CBD products in Florida was legal or not, and turn it from a gray area to a black area. So right now, because the farm bill was written, it means that all CBD products right now in the state of Florida are officially illegal until those rules and regulations are written and approved.
Wow.
And that puts all the retailers at risk.
Right. Well, there's 500,000 little CBD boutiques around the country, and of course the FDA has said that unless you cannot use CBD in your take it in your body, either topically, orally, in any way, because GW Pharmaceuticals got approved as a drug. CBD is a drug, so you're not allowed to adulterate the food products with a drug. So any CBD product right at the moment has to be approved by the FDA. Of course, and now that's the law that is going now. Now they have to fix that, because there's no way in the world they can close down 500,000 CBD shops that are selling CBD right now. So they're going to have to change something, and that's what that meeting was about a couple of weeks ago, and so forth. So I think it's great that you and the other advocates in Florida are trying to write this up like the other states, using CBD as a food and the biomass for everything else. One of the things that's going to be a huge problem for every state with the Farm Bill and hemp is having hot product. Of course, it has to be under 0.03% THC in order to be legal. There's going to be hot product. So my thing has been to implore states that are writing their bills now to have some kind of a scheme, a system for getting the hot product from the hemp industry, if it's hot, and being able to roll it over and sell it to the medical industry, because they certainly could use that hot hemp to make CBD products themselves that has too much THC in it. Now, so far, no one's really done that, and the farmers who might be growing for months and months and months, and they come up hot, they're going to have to destroy everything. So why should farmers who've been putting in all this work and growing this stuff for months have to destroy their products? So I hope that maybe you guys will talk, to each other and figure out how to get this transferred into the medical program, because it would save the farmers lots of disastrous.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's an interesting clause in the way that the law here was written in Florida, where they mentioned the fact that the raw product should test at 0.3% delta THC. Now, here's the problem with that. When you process the plant, if you do anything else other than cold processing, when you process the plant, the acid version of THC will carboxylate, and you'll get a hotter product.
Right.
So therefore, anything you process will automatically become hot. And so therefore, you'll get a lot more hotter product as far as processed product is concerned. So if all the raw product is only being tested for delta THC and not total THC, you'll get a lot more processed product that will be tested hot, and a lot more things will be thrown out as far as processed product is concerned.
Right, and we're talking about concentrating. When you concentrate the CBD and that 0.3% THC into an oil, and you say processing, but it's also concentrating it.
Yes.
That's when you're going to get high readings. Now, once you break that down and you make a salve that's got 300 milligrams of CBD in it, and it's most likely going to be under that 0.03, because there's other beeswax and stuff in there that bring down the concentration. So are you and the other activists trying to figure out what to do with hot product, or right now?
Yeah, because right now they are talking about destruction. They're all talking about mixing it with kitty litter, putting it in lime and destroying it, as opposed to recycling it and giving it to medical programs.
Right.
And we think that we should have it brought over and given to other programs, so that it's not destroyed, because it is a product that farmers have put love and money into.
Right. Also, one issue is the fact that the industry is a fetus right now, so to speak, and there's just rules that can be made now to make it better. If I guarantee you, if farmers in their first harvest have to destroy 6-8 months worth of work and all the money and time, they're probably going to drop out of the program. There's the seeds right now. You have to find certified seeds that have been around and been promulgated into different generations to stabilize it, so that pretty much you have a great guarantee that's going to be under the 0.03%. So sourcing seeds is a problem. So that's another thing that will help keep hemp in the right range. So it's going to happen, and people are fighting rolling it over into the medical program and so forth. So I hope maybe Florida can be the first one to really figure this out and be a model as far as what to do with hot hemp.
Well, just looking historically, back in the 1500s, northern Spain brought seeds down here from using their industrial hemp that they had brought down here, when the King of Spain demanded that hemp be grown in the New World, down to Southern California, Southern Mexico, and southern Florida, and St. Augustine, and I think it was Fort Myers. And when they grew it down here, it grew differently because there was a genetic shift, because there was a different in temperate climate zones. And what you had was a hemp which suddenly developed resinous buds.
Right, it has to acclimate itself to the environment.
Exactly right. And so, I mean, hemp and cannabis is a plant that does acclimate to different climate zones, and so therefore we had something which had more resin in it, which had a greater THC thing. Now the Aztecs and the indigenous people, they recognized the benefits of what was in those buds. The conquistadors, they didn't know what to do with it; they just left it on the ground. But the medicine men realized the benefits of it.
Right. So what was the event that you were at? I think it was yesterday, right? This is a rules-making event. Who runs that? Is it the state running it, and then all you activists get over there? What was that about yesterday?
That was the Department of Agriculture. And basically what we were working on were the rules and regulations in regards to 4 basic zones. First was cultivation. Second was the production of seeds and the sale of seeds and the certification of seeds. Then it was the use of hemp for animals, both for cattle feed and for pets. And then it was the use for food.
Right. So where's all the negativity coming from? What people and what are they trying to prove by putting the kibosh on some of this stuff and making it harder?
Well, actually, it was a very, very positive session, which was good, because our current Commissioner of Agriculture, Nikki Fried, is very positive on cannabis, and it was a very positive session. So I was very, very positive. I left with a very positive thought, because everybody who came in there and put input in there came away with the thought that if they came in and said we need not destroy this, they said, all right, let's go back and think about this and see if we can come up with a solution.
Fabulous.
As opposed to just destroying it. Let's talk about what we can do to divert it,
right,
as opposed to just destroy it. Let's see what we can do about rearranging these rules and regulations.
Sure.
So now I'll grant you the legislation that we're handed, that we had a statute based on it, has problems with it. Like, for instance, it says that they can go ahead and do a inspection at any point in time, which has Fourth Amendment problems with it. Where they can do a search and seizure at any point in time.
Right, right. Well, there's obviously, there's going to have to be some inspections involved. There's ways of inspecting the plants, during the growing season, and they're going to have to put together some kind of inspectors to go around and do that. So, what is the deadline for having rules in place so that next year you could start the hemp program and people can start growing hemp?
Right now, we are looking at the rules being written within the month of August, so that we can have them in place by fall and start giving out permits to grow during the fall, and we actually have growth being done in 2020, and we have product actually being made in 2020.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Now, we may have to have some tweaks being done and some glitch bills being done in the next session for anything that wasn't done properly in the previous session, because the law was already written. If it's signed, and it should be signed pretty soon by the governor, we may have to have things fixed, because again, we have problems, like I said, with the search and seizure and things of that sort, and the way that the testing is being done on the raw plant as opposed to the processed product. And that brings me to one thing that does give me a lot of concern, and that is we have a lot of faux product on the market right now.
Right. That is a big problem. Untested product that says it's got 1,500 milligrams of CBD in it, and there's zero in it, or there's very little. Some stuff is too hot and it's got THC in it, and people are getting busted for taking CBD because they found THC in their blood. So it's definitely something that needs to be worked out. Now, before we end, I want to circle back to an issue that we've talked about before, and that is the gentleman in Florida that sued and was given the right to grow his own medicine. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was taken away from him.
Yes, that's my friend Joe Redner. Yeah, this is a gentleman who had stage 4 cancer, and he was going through chemotherapy and having a hard time of it. And he found that by juicing the plant that he was, of course, getting on his own, he was able to not only survive chemotherapy, but also he was thriving. And he actually was able to go into complete remission. And he's doing quite well right now. It's going on now 4 or 5 years. And he had like about a 4%, 5% chance of surviving. And he's doing quite well now.
Well, that's excellent. But did they take his right to grow away from him?
Yes, they did.
So is he not juicing anymore?
No, he is still juicing, but not legally.
Oh,
but he wrote, he did file a lawsuit asking for the right to grow, because he based it on the definition of a plant, saying that he has a right to possess a plant, living or not, and the seeds thereof, which is the definition that comes from the Controlled Substance Act.
Well,
basically saying that, and he won again in district court, and there were actually people in the state legislature that asked to file an appeal. It went to the appeals court. He lost in the appeals court, and now he's going to the Supreme Court of Florida to try to win that case.
Well, we certainly wish him luck on that. And, juicing is people are going to find out that juicing is going to be one of the most important parts of using cannabis as a medicine, for sure. And it's a area of medical cannabis that is not being served properly, because they're making more money, taking the plant to all the way to bud and selling it that way for concentrates. If somebody goes into the business of just selling juice, that's an unserved market, and I think it's going to be fantastic. So, Gary, how can people get a hold of you if they want to talk to you about what's going on in Florida?
Well, they can contact me by email if they want, at gstein@claritypac.org. That's my political action committee. Or they can always catch me on Facebook as well.
And what's happening with Florida and the responsible adult use of cannabis?
Well, we've got a couple of ballot initiatives for 2020 that they're working on desperately. Now, they did file a legislation this last year that's going to make it more difficult for citizen petitions to go through by preventing people from being able to pay petitioners to actually put through petitions, and they raised the level from 60 to 66% for those petitions to go through on ballots.
Jeez. They're really trying to make it hard. That's just, Florida, again, is a crucial state for a lot of stuff. They're very conservative. I did live there for 9 years in Naples, and from 96 to 2005, and cannabis was very tough to find for me when I was there, for sure. But Gary Stein, thank you for being Medical Marijuana Radio's Florida representative down there, and I appreciate all your hard work. And be careful driving, as always, and I appreciate your time today.
All right, take care, Larry.
My pleasure. We'll be right back after this.
I'm taking those pills just to forget it. Oh yes, forgetting memories. Oh no, stuck in my head again. You need a medicine.
It's a long way up when you are down. There's no way out when you feel alone.
Let it all go,
I wash it down my throat to get myself out. Left you a note, what it's all about. You give me the look, could I give it up? You wanna know what I think about. Could I let go? I'm taking those pills just to forget it. Oh yes, forget the memories. Oh no, stuck in my head again. You need a medicine. Can you forgive me? Oh why? Are you still by my side? Oh yes, for you I stay alive. But I would rather die. Played it into words, would scare you off. This is how I feel. I can let you see. But I'll drink behind closed doors, won't see my flaws, hide what I can to be your Superman. You give me the look, I tell you it's okay. You wanna know, I don't know what to say. I can feel my face. I'm taking those pills just to forget it. Oh yes, forget the memories. Oh no, stuck in my head again. You need a medicine. Can you forgive me? Oh why? Are you still by my side? Oh yes, for you I stay alive. But I would rather die. But I feel how it's catching a following. A part of my soul, my shadow surrounds me wherever I go. Oh, the demon is taking me, but I feel how it's catching a following. A part of my soul, my shadow surrounds me wherever I go.
I'm taking those pills just to forget it. Oh yes, forgetting memories. Oh no, stuck in my head again. You need a medicine.
Can you forgive me? Oh why? Are you still by my side? Oh yes, for you I stay alive. But I would rather die.
The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana. Radio show.
Well, I want to thank Gary Stein for telling us what's happening, updating us on Florida and the hemp program and the medical program and the adult responsible use program. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Michael Krawitz, for commenting on Earl Blumenauer's removal of his bill. Keep fighting, Michael. Keep fighting. Also want to thank my two radio mentors, both with the initials HS. Thank you for your inspiration. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, if you're an activist, an advocate, you have a product to sell, a story to tell, write me at info@mmjradio.com. Again, info@mmjradio.com. If you'd like to hear some of our older shows, you can go to medicalmarijuanaradio.com. Also, MMJRadio.com. My YouTube channel is LSLove88. On SoundCloud and Spreaker, audio only, we are MMJ Radio. On CannabisTube.net, we have our own channel, MMJ Radio. Also on Now TV, channel 937. And coming soon, thecannachannel.com.
The magical marijuana. Shalabah.
Peace and love.
Shalom.
Peace and love and chaos where it needs to be. Oh yeah. Fuck Trump.